At the notary's office, my son grabbed my hand, hissing, "Sign now, or I'll have you declared incompetent." He didn't notice my grandson filming every word. I made one silent call, and by Thursday morning, his bank account was frozen. David thought he could steal my home, but he's about to learn how a professional appraiser values a betrayal. Before continuing, subscribe to our new channel, where we tell stories about men who take revenge on their insolent children, sons-in-law, and daughters-in-law. My name is Raymond Cole. I'm 68 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon, in a 2-story house on S.E. Hawthorne Boulevard that I bought before my son David was old enough to spell the word mortgage. 31 years I spent as a certified real estate appraiser, MAI designation. I walked through other people's homes and told them exactly what those homes were worth. I was precise. I noticed things: a hairline crack in a foundation wall, water staining behind fresh paint, a smell that didn't quite belong. Those same instincts, I've found, work just as well on people. I retired 3 years ago with a clear head, a paid-off house worth $780,000 by the last county assessment, and $310,000 in savings built over decades. I have a workshop in the garage where I make furniture, chairs, frames, small tables. Nothing fancy, just wood and patience. Twice a week I play chess at a club in northeast Portland called Kasparov's. The name's ambitious for a room above a hardware store, but the coffee is strong and the company is honest. Those two things matter more than most people admit. I am not a sentimental man, but I pay attention. I remember what I see. My son David is 39. He has his mother's cheekbones and my stubbornness, a combination that served him well when he was young and serves him considerably less well now. When David was 12, he used to wait by the front window when I worked late, watching for my headlights to come up the street. He told me that once at a Christmas party, feeling generous with memory. I've held on to that image ever since. It makes what came later harder to understand. His wife Christine is 36, with precise blonde highlights and a smile that is more architecture than emotion. She works as a freelance interior designer, income anywhere from $1,200 to $3,500 a month, depending on which client she's charming that season. She has opinions about everything in my house. The furniture is dated. The kitchen layout is inefficient. The living room walls are a shade she calls unfortunate. She delivers these observations with warmth, with evident concern, with the comfortable tone of someone doing you a considerable favor. They moved in 2 years ago. The stated reason was practical. Their lease had ended. The rental market in Portland was brutal. It would only be a few months. I believed them because David was my son, and I had no particular reason not to. I gave them the master bedroom upstairs. It had an en-suite bath, and told myself I preferred the smaller room on the ground floor anyway. That was even true in the beginning. The first month was unremarkable. The second month, Christine rearranged the living room furniture for better flow. I came home from the chess club one Tuesday evening to find my armchair, 11 years old, exactly the right angle for my lower back, pushed into the corner like a piece of evidence being set aside. I moved it back the next morning without comment. The third month, she replaced my kitchen curtains while I was at the hardware store. Very elegant, very much not mine. By month 4, my garage workshop key was no longer on the hook by the back door. David said Christine must have moved it for safety. Christine said she thought I'd put it somewhere myself. Neither of them looked directly at me when they answered. I found a spare in a kitchen drawer and made no further comment. I am, by nature, a man who lets things accumulate before he moves. I watch, I catalog, I wait for the pattern to become undeniable before I name it. It's the appraiser in me. You don't write a number on a form until you've walked the entire property and seen every room. By the end of that first year, I had walked every room of this particular property. I had formed a very clear opinion. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning, about 6 weeks ago. I was up at 6, as usual, and went downstairs to make coffee. A single sheet of paper sat on the kitchen table. It was face up, which meant either David had left it carelessly, or he wanted me to see it. I picked it up and read it. It was a printed template for a quitclaim deed. My address in the property description field, 2847 SE Hawthorne Boulevard, Portland, Oregon. My name in the grantor field, David's name in the grantee field. The signature line at the bottom, blank. I read the document twice. I set it back on the table exactly as I'd found it. Face up, same angle. I poured my coffee. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at the backyard for a while, at the apple tree I'd planted the year David started middle school, and the rose bed along the fence that my wife had designed before she passed. Then I took my coffee to the garage, sat down at my workbench, and thought for a long time. The document wasn't signed, but it existed. Someone had typed it, formatted it, printed it. Someone had thought this through far enough to put my name on a legal form transferring my house to my son. I picked up the piece of walnut I'd been shaping into a picture frame and ran my thumb along the grain, smooth in one direction, rough in the other. I know how wood works, and I know how people work too. I put the frame down, went back inside, and waited to see what came next. It came 3 days later, at dinner. Christine had made pasta. The expensive kind with a cream sauce she'd been careful to mention took 40 minutes. David opened a bottle of wine I recognized from my own rack in the basement, though neither of them noted that detail. The table was set properly. Cloth napkins, candles. I registered all of it and said nothing. We were halfway through the meal when David set down his fork with the deliberate care of a man who has been rehearsing something. "Dad," he said, "Christine and I have been thinking about your situation." My situation. I took a sip of wine, my wine, and waited. "The house is a lot for one person," he continued. "Upkeep, property taxes, the yard, and you're not getting younger." He offered a small, practiced smile when he said it, the kind that wants to look affectionate but lands closer to clinical. "We think it makes sense to get things organized. Legally, a lot of people in your position transfer property to their kids early, before there are any complications." "Complications?" I said. "Estate stuff," Christine said in the slow, careful voice she uses when she wants to sound helpful. Each word given extra room, as though she suspects I might need a moment to catch up. "It's just simpler. We're already here. It's already our home in every practical sense. The paperwork would just make it official." "Our home." I looked at my pasta. "I'll think about it," I said. David nodded. Christine smiled. The candles flickered. After I did the dishes, a habit I haven't managed to give up, even now that I've apparently become a guest in my own home, I told them I was going out. David said, "Sure," without looking up from his phone. Christine said, "Don't stay out too late," with a warmth that raised the hair on my arms. I drove to Kasparov's. There's a photograph on the wall at the chess club, old, black and white, a man bent over a board with the focused expression of someone who has already decided the outcome 3 moves before his opponent understands the game is finished. I've sat under that photograph for 2 years and never thought much about it. That night, I thought about it quite a bit. I lost both games. Walt, the retired electrician who beats me roughly 60% of the time, was polite enough not to mention I was playing like a distracted man. I wasn't really playing. I was thinking about a printed quitclaim deed on a kitchen table and a dinner conducted with the brisk efficiency of a business meeting, and the particular quality of my son's smile when he said, "You're not getting younger." I thought about David 8 years ago, before Christine, though this isn't entirely about her. He came to Thanksgiving alone, and we stayed at the kitchen table past midnight. He was worried about money, about whether he was good enough at the job he'd just started. He asked what I thought. I said he was smarter than he believed, but he needed to stop spending money to feel confident. He laughed, then said, "I just don't want to end up starting from zero." I told him he wouldn't. I believed it when I said it. That night at Kasparov's, it felt like someone else's memory. After the second game, I stepped to the back of the club and called my daughter Linda in Seattle. Linda is 44, practical, efficient, allergic to drama, which means she and David have always maintained a careful distance. She lives in Seattle with her husband Marcus and her son Cody, 19, finishing his first year at Portland State University. We talk once a week, brief calls. She doesn't ask questions she doesn't want answers to. "Hey, Dad," she said when she picked up. "Hey, how's Marcus?" "Fine, busy. What's going on?" I'd thought on the drive over about how much to say, and I'd decided, not much. Not yet. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with before I started explaining it to anyone. Nothing urgent, I said. I just thought it might be good if Cody came to stay for a week or so. I've got a chair project in the workshop, could use a second pair of hands, and I haven't seen him since Christmas. A short silence. Linda knows me. She knows I don't ask for company, without a reason. Everything okay? She said. I'm fine. I just think it would be good to have him around. Another pause. Then, I'll ask him. He has a break coming up. Good. Tell him I'll teach him to use the bandsaw. He doesn't know how to use a bandsaw. That's why I said I'd teach him. She laughed, short, genuine, and said she'd let me know. I thanked her and drove home. I came in through the side door. The kitchen light was off. The living room light was still on. I pushed open the door and stopped. The living room walls, warm cream since 2009, were now sage green. Fresh, still faintly tacky near the baseboard trim. Christine stood on a step stool in the corner, pressing a roller into the edge with the calm, methodical concentration of someone who has already decided this is entirely permitted. She turned when she heard me. Oh, Raymond, what do you think? She tilted her head and considered the wall with visible satisfaction. I found that paint in the garage. It was just sitting there. I figured why not put it to use? It's so much more current, don't you think? The paint had been left over from when I'd redone the upstairs hallway 6 years ago. I remembered buying it. I remembered deciding not to use it down here because I preferred the cream. I looked at my walls. I looked at Christine. I looked at the wet roller in her hand. Good night, I said. I went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and picked up my phone. I searched a name I'd been turning over in my mind since that quitclaim deed had appeared on my kitchen table. Marcus Reed, Elder Law and Estate Planning, Pearl District, Portland. His office opened at 8:30 in the morning. I set an alarm for 7. He stepped off the Greyhound from Seattle with a backpack over one shoulder and earbuds around his neck. Cody Wallace, my grandson, Linda's son, a first-year student at Portland State who'd agreed to spend 10 days with his grandfather without asking too many questions about why. He had his mother's practical eyes and his father's quietness, which in my experience is a useful combination. I picked him up at the bus terminal on Southwest 6th, and we drove to the house, mostly in silence. I pointed out a few things along the way. The chess club, the hardware store where I buy sandpaper, the coffee place on Hawthorne. He nodded at each one as though filing it away. That quality, the noticing, the storing, I recognized. When we pulled into the driveway, I gave him a moment to look at the house before we went in. Nice place, he said. It is, I said. Still mine too, for now. He looked at me when I said that, just for a second. Then he picked up his backpack and followed me inside. Christine was in the kitchen. She turned from the counter with a smile already arranged, the kind that arrives slightly before the emotion that's supposed to produce it. Cody, look at you, you're so grown up. She said it the way people say things they've prepared in advance. Then to me, still smiling, Raymond, I was going to make dinner for everyone tonight. I hope that's all right. It's your kitchen, I said pleasantly, and watched something pass across her face, a flicker of satisfaction or perhaps a slight confusion about whether it was a concession at all. I went to show Cody the guest room. We ate together that evening. Pasta again. Christine seemed to have a rotating cast of 2 or 3 dishes she cycled through on special occasions. David arrived home at 6:45, jacket still on, keys dropped on the kitchen counter without looking where they landed. He gave Cody a handshake and a shoulder clap, the greeting of a man performing warmth for an audience. Good to see you, buddy. How's school? Good, Cody said. Still doing communications? Computer science. Right. David poured his own glass without offering to fill anyone else's, and began talking about his week. A deal he'd nearly closed, a difficult client, numbers not adding up. Christine listened with the steady attention of someone who has heard this particular monologue many times. I ate my pasta and watched them both. What I noticed over the course of that dinner was something I'd been aware of in pieces, but hadn't fully assembled until I had the contrast of Cody sitting beside me. Cody asked me questions. Simple ones, about the workshop, about the chess club, about a repair I'd mentioned to the back fence. Not out of obligation, out of actual interest. He leaned slightly toward me when I answered. He laughed at the right moments. David, across the table, asked me nothing. Once you notice a thing like that, you cannot unnotice it. After dinner, I took Cody out to the garage. I showed him the walnut frame I was finishing, the bandsaw, the lathe I use for chair legs. He picked up tools carefully and set them down the same way, which told me his mother had raised him right. We worked for about 40 minutes. I showed him how to read grain before you cut, and then we sat on the 2 stools by the workbench. I told him what I needed to tell him. Not everything, just enough. I told him that his Uncle David had been applying some pressure regarding the house. I told him there might be a situation over the next week or so where I would need someone nearby who could, I chose the word carefully, document things. I told him I wasn't asking him to do anything except be present and keep his phone charged. He looked at me steadily. Keep my phone charged, he repeated, and with you, at all times. Okay, he said. No drama. No questions I wasn't prepared to answer. Just the one word, the way his mother says things when she's already made a decision. I might be making a fuss over nothing, I said. Somehow I don't think so, he said. I didn't argue the point. The next morning, David knocked on the door of the reading room I use as an office. He had a manila folder in his hand. Got a minute, Dad? I put down my book. I have several. He sat across from me and placed the folder on the side table with the deliberate care of someone presenting evidence. Inside was a multi-page document. He slid it toward me. Durable power of attorney, he said. I had it drawn up. If anything ever happens to you, medically, I can make decisions on your behalf. Handle finances, the house. Purely protective. I picked up the document and read the first 2 pages at a normal pace, then slowed down considerably on pages 3 and 4. On page 4 there was a clause granting David authority to execute real estate transactions on my behalf, without requiring my separate approval for each transaction. Purely protective, I said. Exactly. He smiled. The same architectural smile Christine uses, built for display rather than expression. A lot of people your age have this kind of arrangement. It's just practical. I picked up the folder and said I'd like to read it properly before making any decisions. Of course, he said. Take your time. He left. I put the folder in my desk drawer, looked out the window at the apple tree for a while, then picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd written on the back of a grocery receipt at Kasparov's 3 nights ago. Reed Law Group, said the voice on the other end. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Reed, I said, as soon as possible. The earliest opening was in 2 days. I took it without hesitation. The Reed Law Group occupied the 4th floor of a building in the Pearl District. The elevator had the particular quiet that expensive buildings maintain. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat in the waiting area with the manila folder, the quitclaim deed printout, and my bank statements in a leather portfolio I've owned since 1997. Marcus Reed came out himself. 52, compact, unhurried, the manner of a man who has heard a great many stories and learned to sort them quickly. Gray at the temples, firm handshake, an office with West Hills view, and a bookshelf that looked genuinely red. He sat across from me, folded his hands on the desk, and said, "Tell me what's happening." I told him. Brief and specific. Facts, sequence, supporting details. I placed the quitclaim deed on his desk, then the power of attorney, then the bank statement with a line circled in pencil, a withdrawal of $4,200 from the joint household account David and I had set up 2 years ago. The notation read household maintenance. I had not authorized it, had not been told about it, had not seen a receipt for anything it might have covered. Reed read each document the way lawyers read things, deliberately, with particular attention to the clauses that look routine. When he set the last one down, he was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Cole," he said, "what you're describing falls under Oregon Revised Statute 124.110, financial abuse of a vulnerable person. The unauthorized withdrawal is a civil matter on its own. Combined with the documents and the pattern you've described, the quitclaim deed, the power of attorney, the progressive control over your living situation, You have the foundation for a civil action. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means we can file a civil complaint, seek restitution of the $4,200, and pursue injunctive relief to protect the property. He paused. Documents alone won't give us the strongest case, however. We need evidence of coercion, direct statements, pressure being applied explicitly. How do I get that? Oregon is a one-party consent state, he said. You can legally record any conversation you're a participant in without notifying the other party. If your son is using coercive language, making threats, applying explicit pressure, and you have a recording, the case becomes substantially cleaner. I sat with that for a moment. How quickly can you act once I have recordings? Once we file a civil complaint and request emergency asset preservation, a judge can issue a temporary freeze order within 48 to 72 hours, he said. Your son's accounts, pending resolution of the case. And the real estate? The house? A lease pendants filed with Multnomah County would cloud the title immediately. No transfer could proceed while the case is active. He paused a beat. No deed, no notary stamp, nothing would move that property while the case was open. What do I do between now and when I bring you recordings? I asked. Don't sign anything, Reed said. Not one document. Leave the joint account open, but make no significant transactions from it. Keep dated notes of conversations. Who said what? When? Who was present? He looked at me. If there's a third party who witnesses any of the pressure being applied, that strengthens the record considerably. I thought of Cody in the workshop the night before. Okay, there may be a witness, I said. Reed wrote something on his legal pad. Then, one more thing. Get a cognitive assessment from a neurologist in the next 2 to 3 weeks. I looked at him. Preemptive, he said without blinking. If they challenge your legal capacity, a recent clean assessment removes that argument before it can be made. You've seen this before, I said, more often than I'd like. We finished within the hour. His retainer was $3,500, which I wrote from my personal account, not the joint one. He gave me a card with his direct line and told me to call when I had something to bring him. I came down in the elevator and stood in the lobby. To my left was a narrow electronics store with recording devices in the window display. I went in. The clerk knew his inventory. I said I needed something small, clear audio in a conversational setting, a room, or a dinner table. He showed me 3 options. I chose a Sony unit about the size of a lip balm tube, 12 hours of battery, voice activation mode, $47, cash. I drove back through the Pearl District and thought about something Reed had said near the end. Almost an aside, the strongest cases are the ones where the other side doesn't know they're building it for you. David had been building mine for 2 years. The quitclaim deed, face up on the table. The workshop key. The curtains. The paint. The $4,200. The power of attorney with its clause on page 4. All of it documented, dated, specific. All he needed to do now was keep going. Based on everything I knew about my son, I was quite confident he would. I pulled into the driveway on S.E. Hawthorne and sat for a moment with the engine off. Through the front window, I could see Christine in the sage-green living room, rearranging the bookshelf that used to hold my reference collection. Through the kitchen window, Cody sat at the table with a textbook, apparently unbothered by everything happening around him. I got out of the car, put the recorder in my shirt pocket, went inside. "How was your afternoon?" Christine called from the living room. "Productive," I said. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and looked out at the apple tree. The recorder sat against my chest. $47 and 12 hours of silence, waiting to become something worth a great deal more. The next conversation was already on its way. I just had to let it arrive. The neurologist's office was in a medical building on Southwest Barbour Boulevard, 3rd floor, with a waiting room that smelled like hand sanitizer and carpet cleaner. I'd made the appointment myself, 2 days after the meeting with Reed, telling David and Christine I had a routine checkup. That wasn't entirely inaccurate. Dr. Patricia Ewan was thorough. She spent 40 minutes running me through cognitive assessments, word recall, sequence memory, spatial reasoning, the standard battery. She asked about sleep, diet, any history of confusion or disorientation. I told her I'd been sleeping fine, eating regularly, and that the only confusion in my life was deliberate and belonged to other people. She didn't ask me to elaborate on that last part. When she was done, she said my cognitive function was well within normal range for my age. Sharp, actually, was the word she used. She'd have the written report ready within a week. I thanked her and drove home. I put the appointment receipt in the folder with the bank statement and the power of attorney, and I put the folder in the locked drawer of my workbench, the one whose key stays in my front pocket. That evening at dinner, I told David I'd been thinking about his proposal. He set down his fork. Christine looked up from her phone with the careful attention of someone who has been waiting for a particular sentence for a while. I think you're right, I said. Getting things organized makes sense. I don't want complications later. I kept my voice easy, unhurried. I do want to do it properly, though, through a notary. I'm not comfortable signing something at a kitchen table. David's shoulders lowered about half an inch. Of course, he said. Absolutely. We can arrange that. I'll need a few more days to review the documents, I said. I want to make sure I understand everything I'm signing. Take all the time you need, he said, and he smiled. The first genuinely warm smile I'd seen from him in months, which told me everything I needed to know about the nature of his warmth. Christine reached across the table and patted my hand once. We just want what's best for everyone, she said. I looked at her hand on mine and thought, I know exactly what you want. I've known for 6 months. I appreciate that, I said. Over the next several days, I played the role Reed had outlined. Cooperative, slightly uncertain, the kind of man who needed encouragement. I asked David questions about the quitclaim deed in the evenings, practical questions, the kind a confused older person might ask, and I let him explain things to me patiently while the Sony recorder sat in my shirt pocket, capturing every word. He explained 3 times, across 3 separate evenings, that if I didn't get the transfer completed soon, there could be complications with your estate. The 3rd time he added, and honestly, Dad, if people start wondering about your judgment, whether you're making sound decisions, it's better to have this settled. Otherwise, we might have to get a doctor involved, just to make sure everything's above board. I let a pause fall between us. I understand, I said. I drove the SD card to Reed's office the following morning. His assistant, a woman named Karen, accepted it at the front desk with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone accustomed to receiving sensitive materials. I didn't need to go upstairs. Mr. Reed will review these today, she said. Good, I said, and went back to the car. Reed called me 2 days later. I took the call in the workshop with the door closed. 3 recordings, he said. The 3rd one is what we need. The phrase about getting a doctor involved, in context, with the deed discussion immediately preceding it, that reads as a threat, not a precaution. Combined with the bank withdrawal and the documents, we have a solid foundation. He paused. I've drafted the civil complaint under ORS 124.110 and the motion for asset freeze. I'm holding them, ready to file the moment you give me the signal. Not yet, I said. We need the notary appointment first. Agreed. One more piece of evidence from a neutral witness would be ideal. The notary appointment came through 4 days later. David had arranged it himself. Betty Chavez, a private notary with an office on the 5th floor of a building on Southwest Morrison. He texted me the address with 3 exclamation points, which told me he'd been more anxious about this than he'd shown. That night, I went to the workshop and finished the walnut picture frame I'd been working on for 3 weeks. The carved leaf border along the outer edge, the smooth rabbit cut along the inside, the French polish I'd been building up one thin coat at a time. I held it under the bench lamp and checked every corner. It was good work, the kind that lasts. I set it down, switched off the lamp, and went to bed. Tomorrow was the notary appointment. I made one more stop before bed. I went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and stood at the window for a moment looking out at the backyard. The apple tree, the rose bed, the dark outline of the workshop. Everything where it had always been. Everything still mine. I went to bed. The building on Southwest Morrison was a 7-story office block from the 1980s, the kind with dark glass and a lobby that echoes. We rode the elevator in silence, David in his good blazer, Christine in a cream blouse she'd pressed that morning. I'd heard the iron. I was in the same gray jacket I wear to chess club. I hadn't pressed anything. The fifth floor was quiet. Betty Chavez's office was at the end of a carpeted hallway, a frosted glass door with her name in simple black letters. I noted the wide glass panel beside the door that looked out into the corridor. You could see the whole office from out there, and you could see the whole corridor from inside. Cody was already in the building. He'd taken the bus downtown an hour before us, texted me when he arrived. I hadn't told David or Christine he was coming. He wasn't coming to the appointment. He was coming to sit in the corridor and keep his phone camera aimed at a glass panel. Betty Chavez was 58, compact and precise, with reading glasses on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who has notarized a great many documents and has no interest in being rushed through one more. She shook hands with each of us, directed us to the chairs across the table from her desk, and set the quitclaim deed on the surface between us, with the flat efficiency of a dealer laying down cards. "Mr. Cole," she said to me, "I'll need you to confirm you're signing this of your own free will, without coercion of any kind." "Of course," David said immediately. Chavez looked at him over her glasses. "I was speaking to your father." David sat back. I pulled the document toward me and began to read. I read slowly. This was not performance. A quitclaim deed transferring a $780,000 property deserves to be read carefully, and I have read a great many property documents in my life. I read the legal description of the parcel. I read the grantor and grantee fields. I read the consideration clause, which stated a transfer amount of $10, which is the standard nominal figure used when a property is transferred between family members to avoid a proper market value transaction. $10. For a house I'd spent 31 years paying for. I turned to page 2. David shifted in his chair. I could hear it. I didn't look up. Christine crossed and uncrossed her legs. I caught the movement in my peripheral vision and kept reading. I read the covenant clause. I read the notarial acknowledgement section at the bottom. I turned back to page 1 and reread the legal description of the parcel, because I wanted to confirm the lot dimensions match the county records. They did. I set page 1 flat on the table and considered page 2 again. The silence in the room had a particular quality by this point, the quality of pressure that has been building in a confined space and has nowhere to go. Then David leaned forward. He reached across the table and closed his hand around my wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but firmly, the grip of a man who has made a decision. "Sign it now," he said, low and flat through his teeth, "or I'll call a doctor to have you declared incompetent." Betty Chavez went very still. The room went the way rooms go when something happens in them that can't be taken back, a sudden vacuum, as if the air itself has pulled away from the moment. I looked at David's hand on my wrist. I looked at his face, jaw set, color up slightly in his neck, eyes with that particular quality of someone who has stopped pretending. I had watched this face my entire adult life. I had seen it frustrated, proud, dismissive, calculating. I had never seen it like this. I looked at him for a long moment. I said nothing. Christine had gone rigid in her chair. Her hands were clasped in her lap, knuckles pressed together. She didn't speak. Betty Chavez placed her pen on the table with a careful, deliberate movement. She took off her reading glasses. She looked at David with an expression I can only describe as professionally controlled revulsion. "I'm not able to continue this session," she said quietly. David released my wrist. He sat back. Something moved across his face. Not regret, not quite, but the first flicker of understanding that something had just gone wrong. He looked at me. I held his gaze and said nothing. There was nothing left to say that the room hadn't already heard. Chavez stood. "I'll need everyone to step out. I have another appointment." We filed into the corridor. David first, then Christine, then me. The hallway was carpeted and quiet and empty except for a young man sitting in a chair near the elevator, with his phone face down on his knee, earbuds in, looking at the ceiling. Cody didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. But as I passed, I saw the screen of his phone, face down on his knee, but the camera indicator light was off now. It had been on when we'd arrived. David was already pressing the elevator button, shoulders tight, not speaking. Christine stood beside him with her arms folded, staring at the floor indicator above the doors. She had the look of someone recalculating, running numbers that weren't adding up the way she'd planned. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. I said I needed a moment and stepped toward the window at the end of the corridor. I heard the elevator close behind them. I stood at the window and looked out at Southwest Morrison Street, at the traffic and the gray Portland sky, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. In my jacket pocket, my phone was already in my hand. I had a number to dial. Cody was sitting in a chair near the elevator with his back straight and his phone face down on his knee. When I came through the door from Chavez's corridor, he looked up, and the first thing he did was turn the phone over and hold the screen toward me. The video had captured everything through the glass panel beside the office door. The angle was slightly elevated. He'd held the phone at chest height, which gave a clear line of sight to the table. You could see David leaning forward. You could see his hand close around my wrist. You could see Betty Chavez go still. The audio, even through the glass, was clean enough. Sign it now, or I'll call a doctor to have you declared incompetent. I watched it for 7 seconds. Then I handed the phone back. Good, I said. Cody slid the phone into his jacket pocket without a word. I took out my own phone and dialed Marcus Reed. He picked up on the third ring. It's Raymond Cole, I said. Mr. Cole. We have video. The notary witnessed the coercion directly. She shut down the session. A brief pause. Reed didn't celebrate. He said, I'll need the video file transferred to my office by end of day. Secure email. I'll send you the address. You'll have it within the hour. Good. I'll file the complaint and the motion for asset freeze tonight. The court clerk's office accepts electronic filings until midnight. Do it, I said. Understood. Another pause, shorter. Mr. Cole, this is a strong position. I know, I said. That's why I was patient. I ended the call and put the phone back in my jacket. The elevator arrived. I heard it open down the corridor. Then I heard voices, David's, low and even, and Christine's, clipped and reassuring, and the sound of the doors closing again. I didn't move from the window. Southwest Morrison Street below was its ordinary self. A delivery truck double-parked on the corner, a woman with a stroller waiting at the crosswalk, the light cycling green. Ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the city going about its business while mine had just concluded. I've spent a career walking through buildings that other people thought they understood. Houses where the foundation was compromised, where the framing had been patched to look sound, where the price tag bore no relation to the actual condition of the structure. The job was to see past the presentation to the underlying reality, to document what was actually there, not what the seller wanted you to see. I had just documented what was actually there. Cody appeared at my elbow. He'd been leaning against the wall a few feet away, giving me space, and now he moved to stand beside me at the window. You okay? He said. I'm fine. He looked out at the street for a moment. What happens now? Now we go home, I said, and we wait. We took the stairs down rather than the elevator. On the way out, I noted the building directory in the lobby. Chavez Notary Services, Suite 507, listed in plain block letters. She'd been in that office for 11 years, according to her website. 11 years of watching people sign documents. I doubted she'd seen many afternoons like this one. We drove home in Cody's car. He'd parked a block over on Southwest 4th. On the way, he transferred the video file to a secure upload link Reed had sent to my email. We confirmed delivery before we pulled onto Hawthorne. David's car was in the driveway when we arrived. Christine's too. I went to the workshop. Cody went upstairs. I sat at the bench for a while without turning on the lamp, in the particular kind of quiet that comes after something large has been set in motion and there is nothing left to do but let it move. The walnut frame I'd finished the night before was on the shelf above the bench. I looked at it for a while in the gray afternoon light coming through the workshop window. About 20 minutes later, Cody knocked and pushed the door open. He was carrying 2 mugs, coffee the way I take it, which means he'd paid attention at breakfast when I made mine. He set one on the corner of the bench and leaned against the doorframe with the other. David's upstairs, he said quietly. He came home about 10 minutes after us. He and Christine are talking in the bedroom. Door's closed. What tone? Low, controlled. She's doing most of the talking. That tracked. Christine had always been the strategist. David had the nerve, but she was the one who managed the plan when the plan needed adjusting. I imagined her running through options up there. Find another notary, try a different approach, press harder. She didn't know yet that the window for a different approach had closed at midnight when Reed's filing went through. They think you didn't sign and got scared, Cody said. I know. He was quiet a moment. Then, how long before they figure out what actually happened? Thursday morning, I said, give or take. He looked at me with an expression I recognized, the one where he was running the sequence forward in his head, working through the implications. He had his mother's analytical quality, Linda's way of reducing things to their components. I'd always liked that about both of them. Okay, he said, and sipped his coffee. I turned on the bench lamp and looked at the walnut frame in the proper light. Then I heard the kitchen door open, David's footsteps crossing to the back of the house. He stood outside the workshop door for a moment. Neither Cody nor I spoke. Then his footsteps went back inside. I didn't go in for dinner. I wasn't hungry. The next 2 days passed with a particular quality of suspension, the way a house feels in the hour before a storm, when the pressure has dropped and everything has gone still. David and Christine were careful. No new documents appeared on the kitchen table. No conversations were started about the quitclaim deed. David came home from work each evening, ate dinner, watched something on the television in the living room, and went upstairs. Christine scheduled 2 client calls and spent most of Wednesday in the study with the door closed. They believed the appointment had failed. They believed I hadn't signed, but that I was shaken, that another approach would eventually work. I could see it in the particular patience they'd adopted, the kind people show when they've decided to let the situation cool before pressing again. Managed retreat, not defeat. They had no idea what had been filed the previous night. Wednesday evening, Reed sent me a confirmation message. Complaint filed under ORS 124.110. Motion for temporary asset freeze submitted simultaneously to Multnomah County Circuit Court. The motion cited the bank withdrawal of $4,200, the 3 recorded conversations establishing a pattern of financial pressure and competency threats, and the video from the notary's office as direct evidence of physical coercion. The requested freeze amount was $94,000, the full extent of David's documented debt, sufficient to prevent dissipation of assets pending resolution. I read the message in the workshop on my phone with the door locked. Then I put the phone in my pocket and went back to polishing the walnut frame. There's a specific satisfaction in finishing something properly. The French polish had built up over 16 thin coats applied across 3 weeks, each one buffed down before the next was added. The result was a surface with depth, not a coating sitting on top of the wood, but something that lived inside it. You could see the grain and the figure and the 20-odd years of growth that had produced them. I set the frame on the shelf and switched off the bench lamp. In the morning, things would change. I was in the kitchen at 6:30 when I heard David's alarm go off upstairs, the standard phone chime, 3 times. I heard him move around, water running in the bathroom. I made coffee and sat at the table with the newspaper, which I still take in print because screens at 6:30 in the morning are an insult to the day. At 8:47 I heard footsteps on the stairs, faster than usual. David came into the kitchen already dressed for work, jacket on, car keys in hand. He stopped when he saw me. "Morning," I said. He nodded and went to the counter. He poured coffee without looking at me, checked his phone, set it down, picked it up again. His jaw was tight. His movements had the controlled precision of someone managing something internally that they don't want visible. I turned a page of the newspaper. He left without finishing his coffee. 15 minutes later, I heard his car pull back into the driveway. He came back into the kitchen looking like a man who had driven to the ATM and encountered something he wasn't prepared for. The color in his face was wrong. Not pale exactly, but flat, the way color goes when blood has redistributed it itself towards something more urgent than the surface. He stood in the kitchen doorway. "My account is frozen." I looked up from the newspaper. "The bank says it's a court order." His voice was level, but level the way a wire is level when it's under too much tension. They said to contact my attorney for details. I looked at him for a moment. I set the newspaper down. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. He stared at me. Something moved behind his eyes. The first real arrival of understanding, the moment when the picture assembles itself from pieces that have been present for a while. His mouth opened slightly and then closed. Christine came downstairs, saw his face, and went still in the doorway behind him. She looked from him to me and back. She said nothing. This was the first time in 2 years I'd seen Christine say nothing without making a visible effort to appear as though she wasn't saying nothing. I picked up the newspaper again. At 9:15, my phone vibrated on the table. I looked at the screen, a message from Reed. Court accepted. Motion granted. Temporary freeze in effect. Hearing scheduled in 3 weeks. I put the phone face down. David was still in the kitchen. He was leaning against the counter now, phone to his ear, talking to someone in a low voice. His bank, or his own lawyer, or someone who might explain what had just happened to the $94,000 he'd been counting on to manage his debt before the creditors started asking questions. Christine had retreated to the hallway. I could hear her quiet, quick footsteps on the hardwood. I finished my coffee. Then I got up, rinsed the mug, put on my jacket, and went to the workshop. The frame needed one last inspection in morning light. I wanted to check the corner joints under the window, the northeast corner especially, where I'd reworked the mitered edge twice before I was satisfied with the fit. It was good. Clean, tight, no visible line at the joint. I set it back on the shelf. Outside, through the workshop window, I could see the apple tree in the backyard, the one I'd planted the year David started middle school, 20-some years ago, when he used to wait at the front window watching for my headlights. The tree was in full leaf now. Things, I thought, had a way of growing into exactly what they were always going to be. The service of process arrived on a Monday morning. A process server rang the doorbell at 8:15, while David was still upstairs. I answered the door, accepted the envelope addressed to me, signed for it, and thanked the young man, who looked relieved that I hadn't made it difficult. I set the envelope on the kitchen table without opening it and made myself a second cup of coffee. David came downstairs 20 minutes later. He saw the envelope. His expression shifted in a way I recognized, the micro-calculation of someone who has just seen something they were both expecting and hoping not to see. "What's that?" he said. "Legal correspondence," I said. He sat down. He didn't eat breakfast. He left for work 40 minutes earlier than usual. I opened the envelope after he was gone. It contained a copy of the complaint filed by David's newly retained attorney, a Peter Fleming of Fleming and Associates, whose office was in the Lloyd district. Reed had mentioned his name 2 days earlier, when we'd spoken by phone. Aggressive, not always accurate, favors volume over precision. I read the filing carefully. Fleming was contending that I had verbally agreed to the property transfer over several months, that any documents produced by the defendant were taken out of context, and that the video evidence had been improperly obtained and selectively edited. There was also a motion requesting a psychiatric competency evaluation for Raymond T. Cole. I set the filing down and called Reed. "I've seen it," he said before I could speak. "The competency petition." "Yes. It's standard intimidation under the circumstances. The problem for them is that you have a neurological evaluation already on record, conducted before any of this began. Dr. Ewan's report establishes a clean cognitive baseline. Fleming can request an evaluation. The court may or may not grant it, but if they do, the outcome won't give him what he's hoping for. What about the claim that the video was edited? Cody filmed it continuously. There's unbroken metadata on the file. Their expert would have to argue against the device's own timestamp record. A brief pause. "This is a pressure tactic, Mr. Cole. They're hoping you settle or back down before the hearing." "I'm not going to do either of those things," I said. "I know," Reed said. "I'll prepare the response. I'd also like a written statement from Betty Chavez confirming what she witnessed. Her account as a disinterested professional carries significant weight. I'll call her today." Chavez agreed to provide a written statement without hesitation. I called her that afternoon, and she was direct. She had witnessed physical coercion and a verbal threat in her office. She had terminated the session on that basis, and she was prepared to state both facts in writing. She said it the way she said everything, calmly, without drama. I thanked her, and she said there was no need to thank her for telling the truth. The written declaration arrived at Reed's office by the end of the week. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the house on Hawthorne had shifted into something I can only describe as controlled deterioration. David came home and went upstairs. Christine spent more time on her phone. The pleasant, managed warmth she'd maintained for 2 years, the slow, careful voice, the architectural smiles, had thinned to the point where the structure underneath was visible. She was recalculating. I could see it every time she looked at me across the kitchen, the quick assessment behind her eyes, the search for a lever she hadn't tried yet. She didn't find one. What David found, apparently, was my daughter Linda's phone number. Linda called me on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the court filing. I was in the workshop. "David called me today," she said. Her voice had the particular flatness it takes on when she's managing her reaction to something. "What did he say?" "He told me that you're not thinking clearly, that you've been manipulated by outside parties," I assume he means your attorney, "into a legal action that will damage the whole family." A pause. "He said if I helped smooth things over, he'd make sure I was included in any estate arrangements going forward." I let that sit for a moment. "What did you say?" I told him I needed to think about it, and hung up. Another pause. "Then I turned on the call recorder I've had on my phone since you told me what was happening, and I called him back. He said the same things again. More of them, actually. He mentioned your savings account specifically, said the two of us could come to an arrangement that would be fair to everyone." His words. I looked at the walnut frame on the shelf above my bench. 16 coats of French polish. Corner joints cut twice until they were right. "Can you send the recording to Reed?" I said. "Already did," Linda said, "about an hour ago." Reed called me the following morning. "The recording from your daughter," he said, "constitutes an additional independent act of financial exploitation, this time directed at a second family member in furtherance of the original scheme. It significantly strengthens the complaint." He spoke with the same measured efficiency he always used, but there was something slightly different in his tone, the quality of a man who has just been handed a piece of evidence that has made his job considerably easier. Fleming's countersuit was weak to begin with. This closes the remaining gaps. "Good," I said. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. I'd like you in my office the Friday before to review the materials." "I'll be there," I said. I put the phone down and went back to work. The Multnomah County Circuit Court on Southwest 4th Avenue has the deliberate heaviness of all courtrooms, the architecture of consequence. I'd testified in courthouses before, as an expert witness on property valuations. I knew the rhythm, the waiting, the careful language, the way time moves differently inside a proceeding. Reed met me in the corridor outside the assigned courtroom. He handed me a copy of the final exhibit list. I scanned it. 3 audio recordings, 1 video file with unbroken metadata, Dr. Ewan's neurological report, the bank statement showing the $4,200 withdrawal, the Chavez Declaration, and Linda's recording. 8 pieces of evidence, each established independently, each pointing the same direction. "Ready?" Reed said. "I've been ready since April," I said. Peter Fleming was a tall man in his 50s with the practiced confidence of a litigator who wins on momentum and noise. He opened his presentation aggressively, claiming the case was a family misunderstanding inflamed by an opportunistic attorney, that David had acted with my full knowledge and consent, that the video was the product of entrapment by a coached minor. He spoke for 11 minutes. Then Reed presented the evidence. The audio recordings first. 3 conversations, each clearly time-stamped, each containing David's voice, stating variants of the same threat. The judge listened without expression. Then the video. The room was very quiet while it played. "Sign it now, or I'll call a doctor to have you declared incompetent." You could hear every word through the glass. You could see Betty Chavez go still. You could see me say nothing. I watched David watch the video. He sat with his hands flat on the table. When it ended, he looked down, and that was the last time that morning he looked like a man with a plan. Christine was in the gallery behind the defense table. She had dressed carefully. Dark blazer, composed expression, the full presentation. By the time the Chavez Declaration was read aloud, the composition had developed a fault line. Her hands pressed together in her lap, her eyes fixed on a point above the judge's head. When Linda's recording played, David's voice offering to include her in estate arrangements in exchange for her cooperation, naming my savings account specifically, Fleming leaned toward his client and said something low. David shook his head once, sharply. The competency petition was gone before Fleming finished arguing it. Dr. Ewan's report, the judge said, was thorough, recent, and produced by a qualified specialist prior to any litigation. No basis in the record for the petition. Sustained. Fleming tried once more on the main complaint. The judge cut him off. The pattern of conduct described, corroborated by independent witnesses and uncontested recordings, met the threshold under ORS 124.110. Did the parties wish to explore settlement? Fleming asked for a recess. The settlement took 40 minutes in a conference room down the hall. The terms: vacate within 30 days, repay $4,200 plus $18,500 in legal costs. Freeze remains until paid. Fleming slid the document to David. David looked at it with the stillness of someone reading something that has already decided everything, then picked up the pen and signed without looking at me. On the way out, he stopped in the doorway, just long enough for me to see his face clearly. No calculation left, no managed presentation, just a man who had run a plan to its end and found the end wasn't what he designed. I held his gaze and said nothing. He walked out. In the corridor, Christine was still near the far wall. When David came through, she looked at him, then passed him at me. Her eyes were bright in the way that comes just before tears from someone who has decided not to produce them in public. Her mouth was set. I nodded as I passed. She looked away. Cody was near the elevator. He allowed himself a brief, open expression and then got it back under control. Done, he said. Done, I said. Was it what you expected? Mostly. The document that started all of this listed $10 as the consideration for this house. What they'll actually pay is $22,700 and 30 days to pack. He thought about that. Better number. Considerably, I said. 3 weeks later, the house on S.E. Hawthorne was quiet in a way it hadn't been in 2 years. The quiet of a space returned to its proper owner. The master bedroom was empty. The chrome pendant light Christine had installed was gone. She'd taken it when she left, which was fine by me. The living room walls were still sage green. I was looking into paint colors. That morning I went to the workshop, unlocked the door, no spare key required, and switched on the bench lamp. A commission was waiting on the bench. 4 dining chairs, solid white oak, simple lines. The kind of work that takes time and repays patience. I put on my apron, picked up the marking gauge, and set the depth. Outside, the apple tree was still in full leaf. The rosebed along the fence needed attention, but there was time for that. There was time for everything now. I made the first mark on the oak. The work began. If you like this story, subscribe to our new channel and listen to a few stories there. You can find the link to it in the collaboration or description of this video or in the comments. Subscribe so you don't lose us, because this channel may soon cease to exist.